Guto has put it. You're told on the top page of the Daily Nation, West Pokot death rise as rain wreaks havoc. And the 22 is the number of people who have been reported missing following the landslide in West Pokot County, and 52 have unfortunately already been reported dead. And we were told that our leaders made their way there. We have CS Matiang'i as well as the Deputy President making efforts to, get there, and they have made promises to the locals to offer assistance. Brian, what's your take on this one?
I also want to offer my sympathies to the people of West Pokot County. I mean, I've read stories whereby a whole family is swept away by
yes.
the mudslide. And at the same time, I don't think that is the right time to have blame games. And I think, in my view, the government has really tried to respond. As you can see at page 8 of the standard. The Deputy President is there. I can see the leader of majority, the Senate. Senator Kimchumba is there. I can see the Governor of West Pokot. They are there actually offering their solidarity with the residents of the West Pokot. And we saw the armies delivering necessities to the residents.
Right.
We saw the army choppers, the CS for devolution, Eugene Omalu and Matiang'i were unable to reach there because of the bad weather, but at least they made attempts. So I want to applaud the government, and those of us who can do anything, let's stand with these people. Let's offer our support where necessary. But again, as we have been warned by the meteorological department, we have to stay safe and stay on the higher places. You see, I can see from at page 8, there's 5 dead as floods sweep away a car.
That is
somewhere in Kajiado.
Yes.
So actually, it's like the whole country are at risk.
Yes.
So nobody's safe.
The rains are said to have been uninspected, but as far as blame games go, you know that these are annual events. So some of these things are patterns. How come there are no efforts to maybe evacuate people from this riparian land or low-lying areas that are deemed to be at risk? Because as we were talking about this yesterday, it is possible to even detect up to the hour that a storm will pass through a certain region. And based on the geographical attributes of that area, you can tell which people are at risk, and you can actually have them evacuated before this happens, whether it happens or not, but at least build their chances of surviving. Because let's say the 22 missing, if they're actually gone, then that will bring it to over 70 people dead from this tragedy, which is no joke. It's actually a whole community right there swept away or drowned in mud. So why can't we actually put in mechanisms to ensure that these people, even if they're not completely told to leave the area, but for that time when there's danger, why can't we just remove them from the place?
Yes, it's so tricks. You have a point, but again, this is not just ordinary floods. We're talking about mudslides. I mean, the whole earth is been cut off, and it's not unique. I mean, you see even in the U.S. where we have got this tsunami,
right?
With their advanced technology in the meteorological department.
But they do evacuations. At the very least.
They do evacuations. That one I agree. But I think I'll still say that, in my view, there have been some attempts by the government to be responsive to that extent.
Mr. Maliba,
I think, first of all, as a nation, I think within our planning regime, we have got a 5-tier planning regime.
Yes.
And part of it is the geospatial planning. That primarily should actually put us in a much better position to respond and even prepare for such. But from what we have seen in previous years and even in this particular case, it means that particular element, especially the GIS bit of it, and we have actually been spending a lot of money on it. For over time. If you are a person who actually will look into government budgets year after year, especially for the agencies that should be taking care of this, we've been putting in money.
To do what exactly?
To buy equipment. Like, for example, we have had 3 years continuously very special drones showing up on the Defense Ministry for 3 consecutive years. They can even detect movements within the crust and everything else. One would want to ask what happens to that. But largely, this is a phenomenon that happens after every 10 years. I'm forgetting the name, but it should be Indian Ocean drift or something. It happens after every 10 years. if you look at, this is not just a storm, these are landslides, and people who actually are affected are not people who live in lowlands, actually people who live on the hilly side.
Yeah.
The other day, the leader of majority in the Senate, Honorable Murkomen, was actually telling people to move away from the hills because they are breaking off. And he was actually telling them to swallow the pride. He says Nilotes sometimes are not people who would want to show off as people who are in problem or needy, but they're being told to actually just move off and ask for help and accept help. So on preparedness, I think probably we speak to them at individual level, as a person, wherever you are. It might not just be in Pokot. The rains are still around here. It's for all of us. Normally, they say you prepare, you survive, and then you recover. Those the three drifts. The most important bit of it is that all of us should be prepared, at least to have that mental frame that we are in a situation where things are not so good. So will you be prepared?
If you stay there, you
do
might
we understand the basic drills about how do I deal with a flood? How do I deal with an emergency? When it's raining this way, it's not just the waters, even electricity. The poles are falling, there is a possibility of electrocution, cars being swept away, people not being tempted to become heroes and drive into moving waters and such. So there's so much about, and it's not just around here. The rains are, especially for us who are within urban settings, there's the storm water, because there are a lot of hard surfaces. And again, people would actually say, this is happening so far off. But it's been happening in the cities. Floods have actually been carrying people away. Government response is still below par. That is one thing we actually must say. Yesterday, you saw an attempt at politics around this, where the deputy president made it to Pokot, and the CS did not make. And there was a lot of to and fro, especially if you looked at online exchanges, people saying that probably the CS did not want to be in the same place with the DP at that time.
Now, first of all,
saying that the PS who was on the ground and they had the food and the clothes, the blankets and everything else, ran away when the deputy president showed up. So
locked there.
And they locked the store, and there was a threat that they would break in. So we are even politicizing tragedy. But then, of course, there is a photo opportunity for politicians to show up. Again, even if they didn't show up, it's also another way. So the deputy president showed up. But a question that we actually need all of us to think about, is it possible that the infrastructure, the means and capacity our security agencies have, because there's also the possibility that the pilot who has got the final say in a plane actually knew that the machine he was actually flying was not capable.
That is actually what I thought when I heard about the story, because first of all, weather changes. It could be this way in the morning, and in the afternoon it could be different. So that is a plausible argument. And then it's up to his judgment to decide.
Yes, he's actually the final person. So that's also another question to ask, because the plane the deputy president used, of course, it's owned privately. It's a very new machine, the H145. But then the pilot was flying a plane that was last manufactured in 1987. The SA-330s that we use, we call them Pumas, actually were last manufactured in 1987. So probably we are also spending a lot of money officially, and we are giving a lot of capacity to individuals in sectors that are very sensitive. You will start getting jittery if private people have got much more capacity. And government should have a monopoly of some capacities and not some other people, especially aerial mobility.
Well, if he's a businessman and he can afford, what can we say?
But it does
government point to a gap in our own, systems and what capabilities.
If us as individuals have got powerful guns than government. Government should have a monopoly of some elements. And when you talk about aerial mobility, in this day and age, it can do so much. So I do not think it's something we need to interrogate.
Yes, because even when you talk about choppers, when you're doing those rescue missions, sometimes they come in handy in airlifting people out of the trees where they are trying to, hide from the floods or what have you. So it's quite important. Mr. Ogucho, what's your take on this?
I think over and above what my colleagues here have said, I think, yes, the government need to invest a lot on disaster management and emergency response. I mean, that's a huge gap. And like you said, these are patterns, the things that happens every year.
Annual patterns.
It's important that I'm sure the government knew that this was going to happen,
At least the departments that are
the meteorological department and other departments that are charged with the responsibility of tackling such natural disasters. And so I just don't understand why we keep on seeing these gaps year in, year out. But I hope that we are going to find lasting solutions to this in the near future. Better leadership that can help, address some of these issues. And again, I wanted to point out that, politicizing such a thing like what you've seen yesterday, I don't think it's a good thing. This is a matter of life and death, and I think we should give respect to the victims and the families that have lost their loved ones during this, natural disaster.
Right.
And also to say that I think there's need to do a lot of public awareness, especially given that the government have some of this information ahead of time, so that people who live in such highland and high-risk areas can be educated on, how do they respond in case of such a calamity in the future.
Yeah, because even when you talk about flash floods, while it's raining heavily suddenly right now, there's going to be predictably flash floods in certain areas. So evacuations naturally should be happening already, because flash floods are as surprising as mudslide. I'm curious about this issue of photo ops. I mean, it might seem vulgar that a politician might want to, pose and look like it aids in their political clout, but at the same time, on the other side, it looks a bit like they would seem to be taking advantage of the disaster to look like a good leader. So how can a balance be struck?
Of course, I mean, that's, politicians will always be politicians. They want to get mileage out of everything. And I think sometimes it's quite unfair. And I believe responsible leadership is about putting a human face in certain scenarios, like what we're experiencing in West Pokot right now. It is not a time to go and talk about, how to just politicize around things, but to see how best, the affected people can be assisted without really trying to point finger politically at each other.
Mr. Maliba, you did.
But it's important that they also show up. Because within the African setup and fiber, leaders and the old king always should be benevolent, and the leader should be caring, at least to show up. Because at least when you summarize the technical elements around leadership, you still end up with 3 C's. That a leader should be caring. That empathy, the element of caring, the empathy is that they can actually show up when called upon. And sometimes they are showing up even though it builds their political oomph and everything around that. But it's also important that they make a show up. Just imagine people suffering and the leaders are not there, leaving it to technical people. I have seen it even in very developed countries. You remember when there was Katrina in the US, you saw Bush showing up.
Even though Obama was famously
even Obama, it's natural for leaders to show up. But we have got a problem locally that people show up to just take selfies, and sometimes they make promises and they don't pull them through. So essentially, it's not 100% bad.
I think the third bit is, showing up is good, but what's the saddest bit is politicizing a situation like this.
Because I think the mother who lost 3 children is not thinking about any of that.
No politics,
she's grieving and looking for a way out, or perhaps, just trying to deal with the circumstances that she has been dealt with. So it's a bit
so dicey.
It's a balancing act that is, I think, up to the political experts to figure out. Mr. Hayamba, we're told on one of our local papers, the Business Daily today is leading with Kenya Power pushes for 20% electricity bill hikes. And we know that they've been hitting the headlines in all the wrong ways lately, because we're told that there was some scamming that happened and we are supposed to, pay for those tokens that were sold without the knowledge of the company. And so we're being given a prediction that domestic users and small farms will be hardest hit if energy regulator approves this proposed tariffs. Now, what's your take on this? Because electricity is not something we can, but we need it, whatever you are.
You see, as you just said, we have had a problem with the KPLC in terms of inflating the power bills. And having seen quite a number of the management team being taken to court over a number of integrity issues,
right,
we really expected, and we have just had a change of guard. We have the new MD for the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. So we really expect the KPLC to tell us the reasons why they want to
do this,
to hike, because I think we are doing well as a country in terms of generating electricity.
Yeah.
We expect that as we move forward, power bills will be coming down. I mean, we are seeing Olkaria, we have the power wind. I think
and there was a time we were told we were doing quite well in terms of geothermal generation.
Exactly, and we have had a lot of investment in
Right.
this. We have seen Ketraco with all the whales all over the country. So it is absurd that when you are doing all this, then you are being told that we are going to have power hikes. So
power hikes.
the regulator should move in very quickly because the government policy has been that they want to connect so many millions of Kenyans with the national grid. So we cannot connect the national grid, the Kenyan national grid, up the rural areas. At the same time, we hike the power.
Right.
It's opposite of what the government wants to achieve.
Counterintuitive.
Yes.
I mean, well, okay. What's your take on this one, Mr. Ogutu?
I think that, KPLC have played this game far too long.
Yeah.
And I think that, in my opinion, and I dare say that, it just needs a complete overhaul. I think it's a systemic problem within the KPLC. We've seen high-level corruption taking place there. Citizens are complaining about inflated, rates. I know all of us here have been victims.
Yeah.
And that's a very sad reality in a country where we've been told that, we are doing better in terms of generating electricity, So we're wondering, why do we keep on having, our bills, shooting so high?
Yeah,
So
particularly
I think,
those who are not in the new system, the token system.
Right,
You have
right.
tales of people receiving hundreds of thousands worth of bills without
Right.
knowing where they're coming from.
Right. So I think there's need for that office needs to be looked at so keenly and a special focus.
Should it be a question of monopoly versus privatization?
Of course. I think, I don't know, economists would tell you that, what KPLC is enjoying right now is monopoly. They don't have a company that gives them competition, so to speak.
Yes.
And I'm sure if that space can be opened, then we'll begin to see a lot of fairness in terms of all these issues that we are facing.
Absolutely. What's your take?
I think, first of all, the installed capacity of electricity far much surpasses the peak demand.
Right.
And KPLC is still the only person who runs against themselves and they lose because it's a monopoly and they still make losses.
They're losing,
but then it just goes
in
into...
terms of as a business, also as a delivery? Or?
So the business model around how we do our power business is still either rigged with a lot of mismanagement, but deliberately out of, it's not out of omission. I would say it's actually out of commission because if you look at how we are doing generation, distribution, vending, and how the whole system is actually wired, you realize it has got a lot of pilferages. There are a lot of weak points that then allow for a lot of mismanagement, and then cost goes up.
Yes.
As a rule, people sometimes just think corruption is it's just one of those bad vices. But then corruption ensures that the costs of access to service delivery goes high.
Yes.
That's why even with the capacity, that installed capacity being much higher than the peak demand, there we still have got places where people go without power. I'm talking about people who already have got connection. But they still have got to go without power. Yet the installed capacity is much higher, as in there is an oversupply than what we will need when everybody else who currently is connected to the power was using it. But still, there are people who go without power. That is an element of mismanagement. Then the cost issue around here, if you look at how KPLCs run, honestly, even my cattle dip chairman in the village, honestly, the politics around that is actually done way better. The way they get the medicines, the way they clean, and how people actually organize. KPLC is running in a very chaotic manner. You see, even the changes that happened the other day. somebody has been acting for the last 2-3 years. That person was just a low attire, and then they're bringing somebody from far off, and there was noise about it, and then you can't do anything about it. Right. I think this still boils to politics. Let's go back to politics. The decisions we make, that on the day when we want things to work as a country, that day is when the institutions will work. Okay. It's important that we remind people that service delivery has not always been bad. I'm told that when my parents were in the city, when they were young, things still used to work. KPLC will do their work, buses will work well, water delivery will work well. But today, everything looks like when you get water, you feel like you are actually privileged. It is a miracle. And that is where everything gets wrong.
I feel like it's the growth of infrastructure that hasn't matched the populations in urban centers, as well as the deeply rooted corruption that has just been taking root over the decades without anyone fighting it.
Whereas that argument has got its place in this discussion, but we are talking about people who are already connected. Let's talk about KPLC, for example, and the cost keeps going on higher. Long time ago, Kenya Bus Service used to make profits.
Oh, yes.
And it will serve people timely. We have privatized that sector, but what have we gotten in return? Expensive fares, a chaotic delivery sector. So I also feel that unless we work around our governance as a country on so many institutions, even if we opened up power supply to competition and did away with monopoly, the problem with that sector is that the infrastructure that comes with it is a little bit very land intensive, so you might not have so many people coming in. We will still have somebody else who is a monopoly running away with it. But it's still around governance. The costs around this, because you still want to ask, why are we still paying so much? You know, like at the moment you will be told we already have good floods. We've never thought about working this, and this is an old thing that has been around. So there is the element of planning, catching up with population growth, yes. But we've largely caught up with some of those. There is water still, you know, like when people switch off water and then they sell you the water, if you come from the periphery. So still, it's not so much of there not being water. And you're talking about 4 million people, 4.5, 4.6 million people in Nairobi.
Yes.
Let's talk about during the day 4.5, during the night 4.5. At night it should be 5 million plus, because there's 1 million that comes to Nairobi every single day during the day and goes back. So still, it's not so much of planning not catching up. And if it's planning, we have got proper plans. Like, for example, we have got Nairobi new plan. A proper plan that cost us about 1.5 billion. It has got every answer to the problems we have properly done well with the support of the Japanese. The guys at City Hall are not dealing with it. They are busy fighting and exchanging blows. So,
and they've been making headlines in all the wrong ways.
For the all wrong reasons, not the right.
Then you can understand why the city is not performing the way or running like a well-oiled machine. Now let's take a look. Speaking of national assets, on page 10 of the Nation, told detectives interrogate KPA bosses, and this actually made news yesterday in terms of they were halting certain operations because in lieu of this upcoming investigation, and now the board has distanced itself from irregular payments authorized by the managing director, Manduku. Now, the chickens are nearly coming to roost is what this article tells us, over wanton theft of taxpayers' money at the Kenya Ports Authority after board members and management differed sharply at the directorate, at the DCI, setting the stage for the arrest of senior officials. So this is this story is a developing story, and at this rate you're told that the board is clashing with some of those allegations and distancing itself from the decisions that have been made by the MD. What's your take on this one, Mr. Khaemba?
If the board is agreeing with the decision that were made by the MD, then there is a much bigger problem.
Yes.
Because in corporate governance, the MD is supposed to actually implement the decision of the board.
Of the board, not the other way around.
Not the other way around.
Yeah.
So if the board cannot tell us at this time, when we know that there are active investigations going on, then they want to try to run away from the decision that the MD was trying to implement. So I think, in my view, let the DCI finalize the investigations.
Yeah.
And one thing about the current the DCI, the way it is now, I'll give it 100% in terms of their investigations.
As far as this one is concerned.
Yeah, they are really trying to do their job because we really don't want people's careers to be ruined just because to satisfy some public clamor.
Yeah.
If there is evidence of misappropriation of funds, let the culprit be taken to court.
Absolutely. And the article further tells us that Dr. Manduku told investigators to give him more time to bring the required documents in order to show that the tender on concrete barriers and other amounting to 2.7 billion, which are currently being investigated, were all above board. But, you know, the board itself has said...
let them be given time.
Yes, to bring forward those documents.
Yeah, because it's not about taking someone to court. It's about whether there was value for Kenyan money, for the taxpayer lose money or not.
Yes.
So if the MD is asking for more time,
let them give him the time table said
table it and see if there was everything that was done that is above board or not. If not, then we see whoever is culpable.
The law should take its course. And now, Mr. Ogutu?
Yeah, no, I just don't know what's going to be left of Kenya's parastatals. You know, we've seen a number of them going down, and it's because of mismanagement. Right now we're talking about KQ, that's just about to go down, you know, and our KPA, you know, it's a very critical parastatal.
National asset.
That's right, and so I just don't understand. I think people should understand that when they are given such position, they're not given those positions to self-enrich themselves, but to serve the public.
Yes.
You know, when that whole, you know, company goes down, you can imagine how many Kenyans are going to suffer in terms of layoffs. So I think sometimes it's good to put that human face to everything that we do as leaders, and also put the interest of the public that you serve at the forefront. And I just hope that, you know, the DCI and the DPP are going to look at this matter very, very keenly and objectively, and find a lasting solution to it. And those who were found culpable should just go to where they belong.
They should be brought to book. And
That's
Mike,
right.
I'm really interested in a time where this war on corruption will end in asset recovery rather than just, you know, prosecutions that sometimes never end.
And that's a very good point. I mean, what we've seen again with in as much as the DCI and the DPP are really trying to do some good work, but we are now seeing successful prosecutions. You know, we've seen very high-level people being taken to court. You know, they get bonds. You know, and their cases
Are those really successful? Because to me, success would be them being exonerated.
Right,
or
and that's why I've said there's never been a successful prosecution. It's a very sad affair.
Yeah.
And I think there's a disconnect between in the justice system.
Yeah,
and I think they just need to find a way of streamlining everything. You know, the DPP, DCI, and the judiciary should work closely for us to have an amicable solution to these. Because
we've had analysts here on several occasions calling for that investigative process to be complete and thorough and have enough evidence, so that by the time we're hearing about KPA and all these stories, we are having a well-clad case before the courts that will actually amount to something tangible. You know, now, Mr. Maliba, what's your take on this one?
I think there's so much in this story that we are not seeing. First of all, Dr. Manduku says that his signature was forged.
Yes.
And he doesn't stand alone. There are so many parastatal CEOs who will tell you that once in a while, if they try to drag their feet, somehow they have got bigger forces bullying them around to ensure that some decisions are made. What we have to accept is that there are so many public projects that are not in the interest of the people, but they are jackpot justifications.
Right.
So you see something going up. A long time ago in college, you would see an activity going around, and of course there would be a joke that that activity is just a justification of a jackpot. Guys have already pocketed money, so that is just to justify that money has actually gone missing.
About it.
So, and that also happens a lot with a lot of public programs and undertakings that, especially those massive ones. They're talking about inflated, a barrier going for about 79,000. Actually, almost 80,000 shillings
per barrel.
Way inflated. He's then fixed, and then after he's left. But this goes back to something else, political goodwill. When this administration came to power in 2013, we had a committee led by Abdikadir. They worked on a SCAC report on how we will re-engineer our state corporations. There is a bill that has been in Parliament for the last 7 years, called the GOE bill, to replace the State Corporations Act as it is. So long as the state corporations are run in that intricate web of so many laws, the regime of laws around that, the way we manage our state corporations is so complex, just like how we run our public service.
Yes.
Public service is run in a very complex way. Even doing nuclear science is easy. You might not even be able to take basic, for example, basic disciplinary measures.
Yeah.
On a public officer. It looks so easy until you start to move and you realize that that place is actually, the tapestry is so interwoven and very difficult that you can't even move very fast. Same thing with parastatals. What happened with the report by Abdikadir that called for merging of a number of parastatals, reorganizing, and even came up with a guideline, they call it mwongozo, on how parastatals should be run and everything. Quite a number of proposals were made. They have not been followed through. Even SCAC in itself, that agency at the apex, is not even fully empowered to follow through and ensure that parastatals are run well.
Right.
So it might not, at this particular time we are dealing with the fruits. Can we deal with the roots? The laws and the regime that govern the management of our parastatals. So even as we do this, the DCI can actually be as hot as he gets. Of course, the Nigerians will tell you that however hot your anger is, it cannot cook yams.
Yes.
So, and this is a particular situation like that, that however hard he works, so long as the regime that governs, and you know, there's a lot of mischief in lawmaking. At least in this country, we've perfected that. People do a lot of laws and then somehow introduce a very, it looks very, very innocent, but at the time of looking at it, it gets very tricky. I'll give you an example of the National Employment Authority.
Yes.
When they talk about the chair should have at least 7 years in HR and or equivalent of a similar one. Then they bring you somebody else who doesn't have anything like that, but then he or she has hired somebody, has had a business. And they can defend that.
And say that's the equivalent to the 7.
There's so much mischief in our laws. So you will find that these cases run. And I know it's easy to say that we want these cases to be investigated to conclusion. But at what conclusion when the basis, the foundation is actually very muddied? You don't know the end from the beginning. It becomes very difficult.
Absolutely.
So I think KPA's case is just symptomatic of what we are seeing in all other parastatals. Probably we need to go back to Mwongozo, go back to the SCAC report by Abdikadir, and just follow through the recommendations that were made. It's not helpful for us to be using a lot of money doing reports. We are even launching one today. And you know how the SCAC report was launched with a lot of fanfare, and there was a lot of communication around it, and then it's been packed 7 years down the line.
We have the best plans, best reports, and what have you. I'm even told there was a bill that is quite similar to what the BBI is promising, but then it never saw the light of day, and then we're having something yet again that you're waiting to see. But that's going to be the basis of our next discussion. But for now, let's take a short break. When we come